On September the 11th, 2001, 20 years ago today, 19 militants associated with the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 airplanes and carried out suicide attacks against targets in the United States. 2 of the planes were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon just outside Washington, D.C., and the 4th plane crashed in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people were killed. 20 years ago today, at 8:45 a.m., on a beautiful, clear morning, as New Yorkers were commuting to work, fighting over taxis in Times Square, jogging in Central Park and queuing up at Starbucks for their early morning cup of joe, an American Airlines Boeing 767 loaded with 20,000 gallons of jet fuel crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. The impact left a gaping burning hole near the 80th floor of the 110-story skyscraper, instantly killing hundreds of people and trapping hundreds more on higher floors. As the evacuation of the tower and its twin got underway, television cameras broadcasted live images of what initially appeared to be a freak accident. Then, 18 minutes after the first plane hit, a second plane, United Airlines Flight 175, appeared out of the sky, turned sharply towards the World Trade Center and sliced into the South Tower near the 60th floor. The collision caused a massive explosion that showered burning debris over surrounding buildings and onto the streets below. It immediately became clear that America was under attack. Now, this was a shameless and horrific moment in human history, and a tragedy for those involved and their families, many of whom had to make the impossible decision of leaping from one of the towers or perishing within them. The scale of human violence and horror is unparalleled. America's response, and that of then President George W. Bush, was bizarrely to invade Iraq, a country with no identifiable link to the perpetrators of 9/11, Osama bin Laden, and the terror group Al-Qaeda. America's emotions were understandably heightened at this point, and the impulse was to fight back and hurt someone, anyone, for what had happened. Evil man that Saddam Hussein was, this ill-fated invasion, which smacked more of unfinished business for the Bush family than a serious strategic vision, simply cost more lives on both sides and fomented hatred towards the West in the region. And with that notorious sexed-up dossier, Tony Blair and his chief spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, made sure that we were signatories and active participants in that doomed adventure in the Middle East. The weapons of mass destruction were in the end about as forthcoming as the Loch Ness Monster. They never appeared. And our clumsy, ill-conceived departure from Iraq, does that sound familiar, by the way? A messy departure, just heaped further shame on Western allies. So how is the world looking 20 years on? Safer? More dangerous? Somewhere in between? Well, if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said perhaps marginally safer. What a cruel irony it is, therefore, that the Allies' well-publicised and catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan a short few weeks ago amplifies the fact that the world is now a more dangerous place. All with the stroke of a pen and a presidential order. No show Joe, what a schmo. The Taliban are back in charge of Afghanistan with access to mineral resources, a heroin industry, and tens of billions of dollars worth of US military equipment. In the West, we've learned nothing from our mistakes of the past, and the Afghan withdrawal is just the latest example. So Western leaders have failed us. But let's not forget who the real enemy are. It's the wicked extremists and their toxic ideology that have perpetuated these crimes. The attack on the World Trade Center 20 years ago was an attack on the United States, and it was an attack on all of us and our values of freedom, humanity and democracy. These twisted monsters are doubtless in the ascendancy now, buoyed and emboldened by the West's pathetic retreat from the region. We will, in time, have no choice but to return to the stage of war. From counterintelligence to strategic deployment of troops and potential drone and airstrikes, the war on terror will continue. To think that it ever would end is a pipe dream. It's no different, is it, to our conversation yesterday about Winston Churchill, who faced off against fascism and won. The human battle between good and evil will never end. But be clear that the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS may prevail in certain battles, but they will never win the war. Good will always out, and it is good for which we must now fight. Today is the time to reflect on the human tragedy of 9/11 and the lost lives. The great broadcaster David Letterman, on his CBS programme The Late Show, came on air live from New York City shortly after the attacks. And his moving words are just as relevant now as they were then. Here's what he had to say.
The reason we were attacked, the reason these people are dead, these people are missing and dead, and they weren't doing anything wrong. They were living their lives. They were going to work. They were traveling. They were doing what they normally do. As I understand it, and my understanding of this is vague at best, another smaller group of people stole some airplanes and crashed them into buildings. And we're told that they were zealots fueled by religious fervor. And if you live to be 1,000 years old, will that make any sense to you? Will that make any goddamn sense?
In loving memory of all of those who lost their lives 20 years ago today, on the 11th of September 2001, may you rest in peace.